In this video, I'm going to expand the binomial x minus 2 to the fourth power by using the binomial theorem and Pascal's triangle. So an alternative to this would be writing this out 4 times as x minus 2 times x minus 2 times x minus 2 times x minus 2, and then you have to do a ton of foiling. But I think there's a lot more room for error when you do it that way. This is what's called the binomial theorem. We use Pascal's triangle, and instead of multiplying it out that way, I'm going to show you another way that we can do this. First things first, you need to know which row of Pascal's triangle to use. I have a video where I showed you how to write the triangle. I would suggest that you watch that first so you know what I'm talking about. So the row that you use corresponds to the degree in the problem. So since this is a degree of 4, I'm going to use row 4 of the triangle. Notice the top row is row 0. Please make sure you label it that way. Now I'm going to write out the triangle. Again, if you have no idea what I just did, please watch my video where I demonstrate how to write out the triangle. So I have my coefficients that I'm going to use as I expand this out. So when I do this, once I know the row that I'm going to use, I take those numbers, in this case 1, 4, 6, 4, 1, and what I do is I just write them spaced out. Nothing crazy here, just write out your numbers with some space between them. I usually can't fit them all on one line, so you can write them spaced out if you need to, like this. I'm going to leave myself a little more room in that corner. Okay. Next, I am going to take each term of the binomial, and I'm just going to write them after each coefficient that I just wrote out. So I'm going to take the x, and I'm going to write parentheses x after every coefficient that I just wrote. I'm going to do the same thing with -2. Make sure it's a negative because it's -2. So there wasn't much to that. All I did was write stuff out. The last thing I need to fill in is my exponents. So because this is a degree of 4, I'm going to start with a degree of 4 and then decrease until I get down to 0. So just watch what I do here. So I went from 4 to 0 on each of the x's only. Now I'm going to do the same thing in reverse for the -2's. Instead of starting at 4 and decreasing, I'm going to start at 0 and increase. So for one of them, you start at 4 and decrease to 0. With the other one, you start at 0 and you increase to 4. The last thing I need to do is simplify these 5 terms, and I have my expanded expression. So for this first one, I've got 1 times x to the 4th times -2 to the 0 power. Anything to the 0 power equals 1. So that term becomes 1 times x to the 4th times 1. My next term, I have 4 times x to the third times negative 2 to the first power. I just like to do these weird underlines so you can follow what goes together. So we have 4 times x to the third times negative 2 to the first, which is just negative 2. So that'll end up being my second term when I'm done simplifying. I'm going to do the same thing with my remaining terms. So I have 6 times x squared times negative 2 squared is a positive 4. Next, 4 times x to the first is just x. Negative 2 to the third power is going to equal a negative because 3 is an odd power. Negative times negative times negative is still negative, and this is a negative 8. Please remember all of these are being multiplied in these little groups that I'm underlining. Finally, I have 1 times x to the 0 is to the 0 power, and like I said earlier, anything to the 0 power is equal to 1, times negative 2 to the 4th power is going to equal a positive number because 4 is even. So we have 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. Again, it's going to equal a positive number because 4 is an even power. Now we simplify. 1 times x to the 4th times 1 is x to the 4th. Next, I have 4 times negative 2 would give me a negative 8 times x to the 3rd. Next, I have 6 times 4, which is positive 24, times x squared. Next is going to be a negative because I have 4 times negative 8 times x. 4 times negative 8 is negative 32. And finally, 1 times 16. Now you're probably thinking that took forever. It honestly only took forever because I explained every step. Once you practice the binomial theorem, it's a lot quicker. It's the same patterns. Just make sure that you are using this instead of writing out a binomial a bunch of different times and trying to multiply it out, because this, I promise, is going to be quicker.